Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:34. More of your stories about the price of petrol in a moment. But as we're talking about money and business, let's get an update on the big stories there. We turn to Will Walker-Arnott, who's from Charles Stanley, Senior Investment Manager at Charles Stanley, and joins me now. And the Financial Times praising the work of one young man. And I say this with no envy at all. Credit to him. Good luck. I speak of Sir Tony Blair, eldest child, Ewan Blair. Worth, well, here's the figures from Will. What sort of money are we talking about, Will? Good morning.
Well, yeah, morning. Yeah, well, he's now raised money for his company Multiverse, and it's been valued at 1.7 billion, making it one of the most valuable startups in the UK. Now, this means it's a unicorn, and a unicorn is a private company worth at least $1 billion, and they're pretty rare this side of the Atlantic. Very common to be found in the US, but pretty rare in the UK. What's quite ironic about this story is that he's seemingly making money by dismantling one of his father's flagship policies, because you'll remember, Nick, that he was very keen to get, Tony Blair was very keen to get about 50% of students into university education. Yeah. And now his son is trying to get people to take a different career path by moving into apprenticeships.
All right, money coming in there. Money coming into Zara as well. I know, beloved by many of my listeners. I don't know whether you or anyone in your life is a fan, but once they get it, they love Zara, Will.
Yeah, Intertex is the company, and they had a very good day in the markets yesterday, up 6%. As you said, they probably that name is not familiar to your listeners, but they own brands like Zara. Yeah. They reported very, very good results yesterday. What were the themes behind these results? Well, they now expect online sales to account for about 30% of their sales going forward, so it suggests that the pandemic pivot to online is here to stay. They had some problems in Russia. They had to close about 500 stores there, but significantly, they posted very strong growth in the US, and that still remains their second largest market. So the US consumer is still spending money on non-discretionary items, which is a positive.
All right. It's a brief performance today because I've got Michael Gove hanging on the line. We'll talk in more detail tomorrow. Thanks. Will Walker-Arnott, Senior Investment Manager with Charles Stanley.
LBC Business Update.
With Direct Line Landlord Insurance. Get multi-property insurance.
So let's go to Michael Gove. I'm sure he's going to tell us more about this announcement. It's almost like sale of the century once again, as piloted some years ago by Margaret Thatcher, the idea that people will be able to buy their housing association or council housing, even benefit claimants, proclaims one headline in The Times, a paper of great record. Michael Gove is Levelling Up Housing and Community Secretary and joins me now. Can we just touch on one thing before we get to details on this, Mr. Gove? I have to say, you will be aware petrol prices spiked by their highest levels on 17 years yesterday. Yes. The OECD says the UK economy will grow 3.6% this year, followed by 0% growth next year. And others are saying we're looking at double-digit inflation. What are you and your senior colleagues going to do about it? Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick. Challenging news, yes. On fuel, it's the case that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has already cut fuel duty by 5 pence, and we are keeping a vigilant watch on what's happening on the forecourts.
That's been wiped out, Mr. Gove, of course, by increases, as you'll be aware.
Oh, completely. I'm not for a moment, Nick, denying the pressures that households are facing. They're very real, and government can help. But when we're facing the sorts of problems that we have in the energy market as a result of war in Ukraine, then it is very difficult for everyone. And I know that many of your listeners, some of them have been abroad over the half term, will have seen those prices in places in Europe, for example, which have been spiralling even ahead of our own. You also quite rightly raised the very bracing report from the OECD. Just two things I'd say to put it in context. We had quite high growth, second highest in the G7. They're predicting that our growth will be lower, but they're also predicting that inflation will fall as well. We'll see, because one of the things about the OECD report is that, entirely fair, but it was produced, the groundwork was done, I think, before the Chancellor's big package, just before the recess, with more support for people to help with the cost of living. So, as ever, Rishi will do everything he can to help those who are most vulnerable. But when we're facing the sorts of difficulties that the war has generated, and particularly some of the difficulties that we inherited after the COVID lockdown, then it is not an easy time. I don't shy away from that.
But if we come back to growth, we heard the Prime Minister yesterday saying that the government's only been able to take the measures that it's taken. He would claim to provide the support to citizens because of the growth the UK has enjoyed. And now we hear the growth is zero. Who's right?
Well, as I say, it is a prediction from one, pretty robust think tank, but it's a think tank prediction. It's also the case that it's expected that after a period of lower growth, that the economy will bounce back and that inflation will fall. But as I say, the prediction was made, I think, before there was an opportunity to digest all of the measures that Rishi announced just the other week.
Do you run a motor car, Mr. Gove? I'm unaware whether you do or you don't. A personal car.
I used to. I don't have a car at the moment.
Oh, so there's no point asking. Fair enough. There's no point asking you. Let me instead ask you, do you know the breakdown in percentage terms of what goes to the government for each litre of fuel? Are you aware of that?
Not off the top of my head,
Okay.
no.
Fuel duty, 34.9%. VAT, 16%. You're a bright bloke. That means that more than 50% goes to, when I say you, I don't mean you, goes to the government. Why?
No,
You've had your own the government, has had its own windfall here by the increase in the price of petrol. You're very keen on windfall taxes for the energy companies. Why can't there be a windfall tax on the government? Because you're taking more than 50% every time people fill up their cars, motorbikes and vans. Mr. Gove.
It's a fair challenge, but one of the things we discussed earlier is the fact that the Chancellor has reduced fuel duty, and indeed fuel duty has been frozen in the past. Every time that we have frozen or cut fuel duty, the opposition parties have voted against that, and it's understandable that when you've got a need to balance both pressure on the consumer, but also the need to make sure that public services are funded, fuel duty along with other duties is one of the measures that any government would use.
But you have had a windfall. Surely the idea of perhaps suspending VAT, taking 10p off the fuel duty, something like that to help people, that must be worth consideration, Mr. Gove.
Well, Rishi's always looking at ways in which we can help people face the cost of living challenges that we're all facing at the moment. But it's also the case that we need to make sure that we continue to fund public services as well. Right. So I will, when I see Rishi a little bit later, I will make the point to him that you very fairly made to me. But again, the windfall tax that you mentioned we're imposing on energy companies, the energy levy that the Chancellor has introduced, that will help to reduce some of the pressures that hard-pressed consumers are facing.
Some were struck. You mentioned Rishi. Some were struck yesterday. The Prime Minister, of course, his first appearance since that no confidence vote, and there was Rishi by his side, and the great Zahawi and Pritzker, and I think even the doctor was in the house, Dr. Coffey and Dominic Raab. Michael Gove, you weren't there. Why?
I was preparing for the speech that I gave on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is the new legislation that we're introducing, which will help to level up the economy.
Well, I'm sure the Pritzker had a lot to do, and I'm sure the great Zahawi had a lot, but they all managed to turn up. You are full square behind the PM, aren't you, Mr. Gove?
Absolutely. But when anyone's watching Prime Minister's Question Time, I think that, as you say, if your gaze temporarily moves away from the Prime Minister and onto the front bench, the great Zahawi and the Pritzker are a far more decorative addition to the front bench than my ugly mug.
I will not hear such a thing. But let's move on to other matters. The headline in The Times, a paper you know well, Johnson to let benefit claimants buy homes. What lies behind this, Housing Secretary?
We want to make sure that more people can enjoy the dream of home ownership. The number of people owning their own homes, the overall percentage, has fallen in recent years. We want to reverse that trend. There are people who are receiving housing benefit at the moment who are in work, and that benefit is going into the pockets of buy-to-let landlords rather than helping people to pay off a mortgage and acquire a home which they can pass on to their children. We want to change that.
So how, in practical terms, what is the price, an average house price in the United Kingdom at this time, Mr. Gove?
I think it's just over 200,000.
It's a bit more. It's £289,000 at the moment. Yeah. How is someone on benefits going to purchase a home?
Well, it's already the case that there are people who are on in-work benefits who are paying significant sums in rent, and the amount that they're paying in rent, if they converted that into mortgage repayments, they would be able handsomely to meet their mortgage repayments from their overall income. And the average house price that you mentioned, of course, takes account of the fact that property prices in London and the South East are significantly higher than elsewhere, and again, as Levelling Up Secretary, one of the things I want to do is to make sure that we can extend home ownership across the country, and there'll be many people in the north, the Midlands and the southwest who will be well able to get onto the property ladder using the amount that they currently earn and receive in universal credit.
What sort of rental would they be paying then if it would match their mortgage payments? How much outgoing are we talking a month?
Well, we're talking hundreds of pounds a month, and we're talking in particular about individuals who are currently, as I say, in the private rented sector. We know that overall one of the big changes in the course of the last few years has been that the number of people who own their own homes has diminished as the number of people in the private rented sector, not the social rented sector, has increased.
But these homes would be sold at a considerable discount, would they? The price would be discounted?
Well, if you're in a housing association home, we are now proposing to give you the opportunity to acquire your housing association home at a discount. Absolutely.
What sort of discount, Mr. Gove?
Well, it will depend on how long someone's been in the home. The numbers will be capped. And, of course, what we want to do is to make sure...
Capped at what?
Well, again, one of the things I'll be doing is talking to housing associations themselves about their ability to be able to release stock. So I won't get into the exact figures at the moment, but
Do you know I've got the figure in front of me.
A universal right.
I've got the figure in front. Well, what is reported to be the figure by the Times, a paper of great record, as you would know personally. Do you know the figure, the maximum discount?
No, I don't know the maximum discount. No,
70%. It says here. That's what Mr. Johnson
yes,
will be saying.
I don't think we'll be offering 70% discounts for our housing association right to buy plots.
On market price, it says here. So who will swallow that? Who makes up that money?
Let me look again at what the Times is reporting. As you say, it's paper of great record. Very rare that they get any facts wrong. But I'd have to check that out. We're not proposing to offer discounts of that scale on housing association properties.
And how confident are you, once these folk have been put on the housing ladder, which is great aspiration, and we all support that, absolutely. What about then maintaining their properties? Has that been taken into account? If the boiler goes, the roof falls in. You've owned homes, you know exactly what I'm talking about, particularly when you've not got a lot of money coming in, and suddenly the central heating packs up. How are they meant to pay for that, Mr. Gove?
Well, again, I think that all of us recognise that once you're on the path to home ownership, that you're taking on an additional level of responsibility. But I trust people to make their own decisions about budgeting at the moment, rather than seeing that money, in effect, disappear from their budgets and go into the hands of landlords. I'd like to see them building up a stock of capital over time. You are right, of course, that if you're a renter in the private rented sector or in the social rented sector, then your landlord takes on those responsibilities. But I have to say that while there are some very, very good landlords in the private rented sector and also in the social rented sector, there are also a very small minority of bad ones. And that's why we're also introducing legislation to deal with that. Yesterday, new bill in the House of Lords to make sure that housing associations that are not looking after their tenants can be fined if they let people down and people are living in squalid circumstances.
Last couple of questions, Mr. Gove. Are we likely to see any tax cuts soon?
The Chancellor and the PM want to and will introduce tax cuts, but the Chancellor would kill me if I announced anything before he did.
Can we have I don't want you to suffer any injury, let alone fatal. Can we have any idea of a timeline, Mr. Gove, when we might hear more?
I respect Rishi too much to say more at this stage, other than, as he outlined in a speech earlier this week, he is a laser focused on reducing the cost of government and reducing tax in due course.
Lastly, next week marks a very dark anniversary in this city and indeed in this country. 5 years since the Grenfell Tower fire. I know that you and your colleagues will be marking that, and you're working very hard about that. But at this time, how many buildings still have these flammable cladding?
A significant number. We've reduced the number of buildings that are over 18 metres high that have that cladding, and there's still much more work to do on those which are at the 11 to 18 metre area, which is also a cause for concern. But I've concluded negotiations with developers. We've got £4 billion out of them in order to speed this up. Remediation work has been far too slow, but at last it's accelerating.
Come on, you're a journo, as am I. Significant number. I can't let you off there, Mr. Gove. What is a significant number?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what I will do, Nick, is I will give you and LBC listeners a full spreadsheet of the buildings 18 metres above, which we've taken the most.
So there is
difficult
somebody
cladding from.
somewhere in your department.
Oh, yeah.
There is a man or woman who could say, Mr. Gove, don't worry, it's 2,971, or whatever it is.
Oh, totally. We can give you the exact figures on the number of buildings over 80 metres that have had ACM cladding removed, which is the worst type of cladding.
And the ones
number of
still with
buildings-
cladding, that's what I was driving at, Mr. Gove. Do we know how many are still out there?
We can give you those figures.
OK, so maybe possibly later today I could have that figure from one of your colleagues?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, appearing here on LBC, making us a little late to the 7:45 news headlines. Simon Conway.
Measures to help more people onto the housing ladder will be set out by Boris Johnson later. The energy watchdog says thousands of customers were provided an unacceptable service following Storm Arwen last November. It's claimed there's been a large rise in the number of jobs offering a 4-day week. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain in the west moving eastwards, many parts dry with sunny spells, a high of 22 degrees.